With its wood grain finish, metal switches, HDMI out, and most importantly, a cartridge slot, the Atari 2600 Plus promises the retro experience with all the conveniences of today, allowing you to play your original 2600 and 7800 cartridges on a modern television with crystal clarity. Today, we'll take a look at this new system, open it up and see what makes it tick, and for viewers of my channel, look at its compatibility with a whole whack of homebrew games. How does it stack up? And more interestingly, how does it compare to its now rival, the Retron 77? Welcome to Mike's Gaming Gala. I'm Mike, and today we have something special. We're looking at Atari's new emulation console, the 2600 Plus. I know there have been a lot of looks at this already on other channels, but in this video, we'll go beyond what a lot of others have done to really get down to the brass tacks on this. In the box, you'll get the console itself, joystick controller, a dip switch operated multi-cart with 10 games on it, HDMI cable, USB cable, and that's it. No power adapter. Frankly, that bothers me. Yes, many other companies omit a power adapter, but that's usually for mobile gaming. Because it's mobile, you can use the same charger that you use for your phone. But this is a console that plugs into your television, so more likely than not, it'll be plugged into an outlet that isn't very accessible. It needs its own dedicated AC adapter, and therefore it should come with one. Not a shot at Atari, more of a shot at the industry. Pack your systems with everything that I need to play. Okay, let's take a look at the actual console itself. Okay, so looking at the system, obviously you've got your on and off switch, you've got your color black and white TV switch. Now obviously, I can't imagine anybody's going to be playing this in black and white, but some games do use this as a option switch for in the game, so it's nice that they included that. You've got your game select switch, your game reset switch. All these switches are metal. They have the same kind of look and feel as the original ones. They feel really good. I like this a lot. On the back, you've got your two difficulty switches for the left and the right player. Despite the fact that this is what's called a 4-switch model, it does actually have 6 switches. All Atari systems have 6 switches because these two difficulty switches are usually put to the back. You've got your USB-C for power here, your HDMI out, your 2 controller ports, and then you've got this little 16:9 or 4:3 switch here. Anyone who knows what they're doing is going to switch that to 4:3 and never touch it again. And that's kind of all the in-out. There are no ports on the sides. There's nothing underneath. Yeah, that's what you get. Okay, let's take a look inside this guy. So we're going to flip it over, putting something soft underneath so that we don't scratch it up. And yes, there was a sticker over this middle bit. I thought, because I could feel the indentation, that there was a screw under there, so I removed it, but you don't have to because there is no screw there. So it seems like there's just the 4 screws around the edge. Alright, get those screws out. This one doesn't want to come. There we go. Okay, and just gingerly we'll pull this up. There's something catching back here. There we go. Nothing in the bottom half. And here we've got just some bracing, little LED for the light here. Okay, So it looks like we've got two control boards, a board for all the in and outs in the back, and then the actual main circuit board here. And I'm seeing right here a little mini USB input, so it'll be interesting to see what people what that connects to and what you can do with it. But let's see if we can take this out here. Okay, and it's connected to the board underneath, so we want to be careful pulling that out. Pull it out as straight as we can. There we go, that's your main board. So that's the HDMI out. We've got this little hidden USB here. And yeah, that's the main chip right there. Interesting. But that's the guts of the Atari 2600 Plus right there. There's really not much to it. I'm going to place this gently over there. Remove this board. Okay, so that's attached to our switches there, so we may want to, that might be a tricky one to get out, because that's connected to our controller ports, and it's connected to our power. This is kind of the I/O board here. If we yeah, and I can see underneath there's some ribbon cables to these control boards. I am not sure that I want to pull this out. Yeah, I think I should probably leave this in. I don't want to damage the switches on the back. It could be pulled out. It would take some maneuvering to do so. I don't know if maybe unscrewing these would help, but no, there's additional screws underneath that that even though you can get at this one, oh, you know what, they've got the holes you can get at that one too. Let me try it. So those are now loose. Does that help? Not really. It does look like maybe this whole section here I could pull out. But I'm a little bit nervous about trying to manhandle this out. I don't want to damage my system, obviously. But this here is really the most important part, and that interests me. It's not connected to anything. Obviously you would have to, so they've promised, Atari has promised some firmware. That's probably where it would be updated from, but making people open their consoles in order to update the firmware on them, interesting choice. I don't see the USB port externally anywhere on this, so that's probably what they're talking about. But it also means that, if you want to add ROMs to this, hack this in any way, you've got to open it up. You can't, it's not like the Retron where you can just put an SD card in there. So that's your peek at the inside. Sorry it's not more thorough, but I really don't want to do damage to my system. And I'm sure I could get it out fine, but I don't want to fight with it right now, especially considering this just arrived today. So I'm going to put this back together and we can start our compatibility tests. When screwing these back together, don't wrench these screws, just finger tight with 2 fingers. It doesn't have to be super tight. You don't want to damage anything. You could crack the board if you screw them in too tight. So just, if you're going to open your console and you're putting it back together, don't over tension the screws. This board's a little tricky to get back in. You have to make sure that these pins seat properly in there and that it's not interfered with the HDMI. So if you're not used to taking stuff apart, probably leave this put together. I mean, there's no real reason to get in here and remove this board. If at any point in time you need access to that USB port, you don't need to remove this board to get access to that. So at least there's that. And the last 4 screws, and that's it. All right, let's take a look at compatibility. All right, Atari has been very clear that this isn't for homebrew people. But I have a homebrew channel, so you're damn right we're going to look at it anyway. So here's a side-by-side comparison of a whole bunch of homebrew carts that I have between the 2600 Plus and the Retron 77. Note that this is not a scientific test. For all games, I'll give them 2 tries for the system to read them, and then make my call from that. Also note that my Retron is updated with the most recent operating system that improved compatibility, while the Plus is straight from the factory. So take these results with a grain of salt. Okay, here we go. We've got 43 games to get through, so let's move through them one at a time. Spiders and Flies works on both the Retron 77 and the 2600 Plus. Hero 2, on the other hand, doesn't work on either of them. Pack Zuma on the Retron 77 does display the menu, but you can't select any options, so it's a fail. The 2600 Plus doesn't even load the game. Space Pac-Man didn't work on the Retron 77, but I swear I've played it on there before, so this might be an anomaly. The 2600 Plus played it no problem. Asteroids Attack is the same situation as Space Pac-Man. I swear I played it on my Retron 77 before, but it didn't work today. It worked fine on the 2600 Plus though. Food Ninja was fine on both systems. Zarkstars 1, A Space Saga, worked on both the Retron 77 and 2600 Plus. Zarkstars 2, Ground Force, also worked on both systems. Zarkstars 4, Nebula, worked on both systems, as did Orbital War and Intruders. This might also be a good chance to mention that I found the Atari 2600 Plus had a slightly crisper and brighter picture than the Retron 77. That said, Rally Racer, with its unique way of selecting tracks by having to power off the system and power it back on, 3 of the 4 tracks worked on the Retron 77. The first track wouldn't work. On the 2600 Plus, it would only load the first track and it wouldn't start. So it's a 3/4 point for the Retron and a complete fail for the 2600 Plus. As expected, Elevator Agent and Turbo Arcade did not work on either system. They're far too advanced. The Immortal John Hancock's Game Panic worked on both the Retron 77 and the 2600 Plus. But Retro Game Quest did not work on either. Catacombs of Chaos worked on both systems, but Game Panic 3 did not work on the Retron 77. It did work on the 2600 Plus though. B-Ball worked on both systems, although the 2600 Plus I had to try a few times to get it to work. Star Castle Arcade is far too advanced and did not work on either system. Amoeba Jump, Bot and Tom, and Tower of Rubble all worked on both the Retron 77 and the Atari 2600 Plus. Escape It worked on both systems, as did Pro Bowling. Although 1v1 Pro Tennis seemed to work a lot better on the Retron 77 than the 2600 Plus. The 2600 Plus had enough glitching that it was almost unplayable. So I'm counting that one as a fail for the 2600 Plus. Hotbox worked on both systems, as did Clyde's Revenge. Extraterrestrials worked fine on both systems. However, Fish Fight had a similar issue as Pro Tennis in that the 2600 Plus loaded it, but it was so glitchy it was unplayable. Alien Attack worked on both systems. Video Time Machine worked on both systems. Alien Radio, I don't know why you'd want to play it, but it worked on both systems. Wall Jump Ninja, a great game for the 2600, thankfully worked on both the Retron 77 and the 2600 Plus, as did Halo 2600, Return of the Jedi Ewok Adventure, and Atom Smasher. Both systems loaded SAC Alert, but there was some weird stuff going on. It's a pass for both as it's playable, but I thought it played a little better on the Retron 77. Depth Charge worked great on both systems. Genesis 3D, although it worked fine on both systems and was completely playable, I preferred on the Retron 77. And I had the same feeling about Havoc 3D and then Ghost Attack 3D. Last but not least, Synthcart worked on the Retron 77, but not the 2600 Plus. Not that it would matter anyway, as Synthcart requires keyboard controllers and neither system supports keyboard controllers. So when testing 2600 games, the Retron scored in at 77% compatibility and the Plus came in at 74%. And if I'm right in my recollection that Space Pac-Man and Asteroids Attack worked on my Retron before, that would give it a score of 81%, further widening the gap. Now of course, the elephant in the room is how does it do with 7800 homebrews? Well, sadly, I don't have any 7800 homebrew carts in my collection yet. I'm still waiting on my June Atari Age order, and that contains my first 7800 homebrews. That said, I've seen a lot of posts stating that basically none of them work. These ones here were posted on the Atari Age Facebook page, and they don't work. What we need to realize is that both of these systems use software emulation, and both of them use Stella at their core, at least for 2600 games. What this means is that neither of them actually play the cartridges. They instead have a two-step process where they first dump the ROM to a file, and then Stella plays that ROM file. This is why things like the Harmony Cart or Supercharger games are incompatible. They simply load ROMs differently, and the onboard dumpers can't handle them. This is also why the included multi-cart uses pretty antiquated dip switches to select games. This also introduces two stages where there could be a failure in loading a game, first with a dump and then with the emulation. Now on PC, Stella is about as perfect a software emulator as we have for any system. It plays ROMs of all shapes and sizes. So on the Retron 77, we have an SD card slot and an accessible onboard operating system that allows us to bypass that dump. Physical Champ games don't work on either of these systems, but with the SD card on the Retron 77, I was able to play the Turbo Arcade demo. I don't even have that option to try on the Plus. Which brings us to my final thoughts. For the pros of the 2600 Plus, look and feel is where it shines. The styling is an A+ and just oozes nostalgia. The joystick feels like brand new old stock, which some people may not like as these were really stiff joysticks, but if you're nostalgic for this guy, you're going to be impressed, and they get another A+ for nailing the original feel. I haven't received my paddles yet, but I did get to play them in Portland, and they get an A+ as well. Homebrew compatibility, out of the box, gets a C. Yes, I know they didn't promise anything, and firmware should be coming, so this may be an unfair category, but I'm a homebrew channel, and I need to cover that for my audience. Honestly, I was really disappointed that it didn't perform as well as the Retron, and the Retron has a lot of detractors for its poor compatibility with homebrew. Hopefully that improves over time, and for those of us who love Star Raiders, keyboard controller compatibility needs to happen. Final category here is what I'm going to call expandability. What's the ease of updating this, loading ROMs, using it in any other way than just plugging a cartridge in? Again, maybe an unfair category as this is meant for carts, but I can't help but notice that again it fails where the Retron succeeds. No SD slot, no external USB port. The only place I can see where anything could be done is a micro USB port inside the console. If Atari releases a firmware update and people are forced to open their consoles to apply that, I consider that a massive design flaw. In 2023, we're better than that. Not to mention that it's a micro USB. You can't plug a USB key in there. I've heard that it's possible to install an SD card slot inside the system, but now you're telling people that if they want to bypass that dumper problem, that they have to get their soldering irons out? Ridiculous. For the expandability, the 2600 Plus gets a D, and the only reason it doesn't get an F is because at least it has something in there to access a board, albeit inside the console. Listen, I have probably pissed off a lot of Atari fans right now. This wasn't made with homebrew games in mind, and I've put a heavy focus on that. I love Atari. I love this iteration of Atari, but I'm not here to make excuses for a corporation, even if it's one I love. And as it stands right now, this is a huge missed opportunity, and I have to be honest about that. If you're the type of person who just has a bunch of original Atari games and wants to play them with something stylish that feels great, this is absolutely for you. You're the market Atari is targeting, and I imagine 90% of people in that demographic are going to love this. My dad would love this. However, if you're looking for anything more than that, take a wait-and-see stance on this. In its current form, it's really just a prettier Retron with less features. And it really, really disappoints me to say that. Now, of course, the 2600 Plus has one feature that the Retron 77 doesn't, and that's its compatibility with Atari 7800 games. Obviously, that's a big bonus for this console, and if you're a fan of the 7800, great news for you. As for compatibility with original Atari games, I didn't run through them here as there are plenty of lists online, and the compatibility is comparable to the Retron 77. So an unfair homebrew focus? Yeah, but that's what my channel's about. Thank you for watching my review on the Atari 2600 Plus. I hope you're not too mad. I know a lot of people will be, but I have to be honest and I have to look at it from the perspective of what my channel is. As always, I've got my contact information on the screen, and we'll see you next time on Mike's Gaming Gala.